The sun crept over the jagged peaks of Montana's highlands, spilling a golden haze across the sprawling 50,000 acres of Blue Horizon Ranch. Eleanor Ellie Whitaker stood alone by the weathered fence, her calloused hands resting on the splintered wood as she gazed out at the rolling hills. At 43, she carried the weight of 4 generations on her shoulders, a legacy forged in 1885 by her ancestor, James Whitaker, and passed down through blood and sweat. Her auburn hair, streaked with silver, danced in the cool morning breeze, and her grey eyes glinted with a fierce determination that had seen her through more storms than she cared to count. The ranch was her life, her sanctuary, her battleground. But lately, the fight had grown harder. Beef prices swung like a pendulum, environmental rules tightened like a noose, and good help was scarcer than rain in July. Ellie managed 45 souls cowhands, wranglers, and dreamers, all looking to her to keep the ship steady. She'd faced worse, though. A broken marriage to Robert Langley, a slick city businessman who'd withered under the ranch's relentless demands, had left her heart bruised and her faith in love buried deep. Now, she poured herself into the land and the only piece of her father, William Whitaker. She had left Storm Chaser, a black thoroughbred mare as wild as the wind. Since William's death, Storm Chaser had turned untamable, a mirror to Ellie's own restless spirit. That morning, as the first rays kissed the earth, Ellie made her way to the corral, her boots crunching against the dry ground. The mare paced inside, her sleek coat shimmering, her eyes flashing with defiance. Ellie slipped through the gate, her breath steady, her voice a low hum. "Easy, girl. We've got this." But Storm Chaser wasn't in the mood for peace. She snorted, tossed her head, and reared up, hooves slashing the air like blades. Ellie stumbled back, her pulse racing, dirt stinging her eyes. She caught herself against the fence, cursing under her breath. That's when she saw him, a lone figure leaning against the rails, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He was tall, lean as a whip, with deep brown eyes that seemed to hold shadows of a life she couldn't yet fathom. His clothes were faded but neat, his jaw dusted with stubble. There was a quiet strength in the way he stood, like a man who'd faced the world and come out the other side. "Can I help you?" Ellie called, brushing the dust from her jeans, her tone sharper than she intended. The stranger stepped closer, his boots scuffing the earth. "Name's Nathan Caldwell. Nate. Heard you might need a hand around here." Ellie crossed her arms, sizing him up. She didn't know him from Adam, and trust wasn't something she handed out like candy. But there was something in his voice, calm, steady, that tugged at her. "We're always short on good hands," she said, her gaze narrowing. "What can you do?" Nate's eyes flicked to Storm Chaser, who was still snorting and pawing the ground. "I've got a way with horses," he said. Simple as that. Ellie arched a brow. "Prove it." Without a word, Nate climbed over the fence, his movements smooth and unhurried. Ellie's breath caught as he stepped into the corral, the mare's ears twitching toward him. Storm Chaser froze, her muscles tense, but she didn't bolt. Nate held out a hand, slow and sure, his voice a low murmur Ellie couldn't quite catch. And then, like something out of a dream, the mare stepped forward, her muzzle brushing his palm. Ellie's throat tightened. She hadn't seen Storm Chaser let anyone near her in years, not since William. "How'd you do that?" she whispered, barely aware she'd spoken aloud. Nate turned, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Sometimes, you just have to listen." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning Ellie couldn't yet grasp. She studied him, the lines etched into his face, the quiet pain in his eyes, and felt a stir she hadn't known in ages. "You're hired," she said, the decision spilling out before she could overthink it. Start today. Nate nodded, tipping his hat slightly. Won't let you down? As he led Storm Chaser toward the barn, Ellie watched, her heart thumping in a rhythm she didn't recognize. There was a story behind this man, a shadow he carried, and she couldn't shake the feeling that his arrival was about to change everything. The ranch stretched out before her, vast and untamed, whispering promises of struggle and maybe, just maybe, something more. The day wore on, the sun climbing high, baking the earth beneath its unrelenting gaze. Ellie threw herself into work, checking fences, tallying feed, barking orders to the crew, but her mind kept drifting to Nate. He moved through tasks with a quiet efficiency, earning nods from Diego Alvarez, the gruff foreman who didn't impress easy, and a curious glance from Clara Nguyen, the sharp-eyed vet who'd seen it all. Even old Hank Dawson, the horse trainer with a limp and a lifetime of stories, watched Nate with a flicker of respect. By late afternoon, Ellie found herself back at the corral, drawn there like a moth to flame. Nate was brushing Storm Chaser, his hand steady, the mare calm under his touch. She leaned against the fence, arms crossed, pretending to check the water trough. "You've got a gift," she said, breaking the silence. Nate didn't look up, just kept brushing. "Had a lot of practice." "Where'd you learn?" she pressed, curiosity getting the better of her. He paused, just for a heartbeat, then resumed. "Here and there. Montana mostly." Ellie waited, but he didn't elaborate. She should have let it go. Lord knows she had enough on her plate, but something about him pulled at her, a thread she couldn't help but tug. "You're not much for talking, are you?" Nate's mouth quirked, a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Only when there's something worth saying." She laughed, a short, surprised sound that felt foreign on her tongue. "Fair enough." The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Nate finished with Storm Chaser and stepped back, wiping his hands on his jeans. He glanced at Ellie, and for a moment, their eyes locked grey, meeting brown, a silent question passing between them. Then he turned away, heading toward the bunkhouse, leaving her standing there, the air thick with unspoken words. That night, Ellie sat on her porch, a glass of whiskey in hand, the stars sprawling endless above. The ranch hummed with its usual sounds, cattle lowing, wind rustling through the pines. But her thoughts were on Nate. Who was he? Really a drifter with a knack for horses, or something more? She took a sip, the burn grounding her. Whatever he was hiding, she'd find out. Blue Horizon had survived worse than secrets, and so had she. But as she stared into the dark, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that Nate Caldwell wasn't just passing through. He'd stirred something in her, a spark, a hope, a fear, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what came next. The night stretched on, vast and wild, and somewhere out there, Storm Chaser whinnied softly, as if she knew the story was only beginning. The next morning, Ellie woke before dawn, the sky still a deep indigo as she pulled on her boots and stepped out into the crisp Montana air. Blue Horizon Ranch lay quiet, save for the distant lowing of cattle and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Her mind drifted to Nate Caldwell, the mysterious stranger who'd arrived just days ago. His quiet demeanor and uncanny way with horses, especially her own Storm Chaser, had left an impression she couldn't shake. She made her way to the barn, determined to unravel a little more of the man who'd stepped into her world. As she approached the corral, she saw him, Nate, leaning against the fence, his silhouette stark against the fading stars. Storm Chaser stood close, her head dipping to nuzzle his shoulder in a display of trust Ellie hadn't witnessed since her father's time. Her breath hitched. It was a connection that spoke of more than skill. It was something deeper, something unspoken. "Morning," Ellie called, her voice soft in the stillness. Nate turned, his dark eyes catching hers with a flicker of warmth. "Morning, Miss Whitaker." "Ellie," she corrected, stepping closer. "We're past formalities. Don't you think?" A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Ellie." Then, she joined him at the fence, their shoulders nearly brushing. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," he said, his gaze returning to Storm Chaser. "Thought I'd check on her." Ellie watched his hands move over the mare's coat, gentle, sure, like he'd been born to it. "You've got a gift," she said, echoing her thoughts from their first meeting. "Where'd you learn that?" Nate's hand paused, a shadow crossing his face. "My grandfather," he replied, his voice low. "He had a way with horses. Said they could feel a man's heart, whether it held steady or not." She tilted her head, intrigued. "And yours?" He met her eyes, a guarded look in his own. "Steady enough, I hope." The air thickened with unspoken words, a current Ellie felt but didn't push. She'd learned patience running this ranch. Trust came in its own time. Instead, she shifted gears. "You settling in all right? Bunkhouse treating you well?" Nate's shoulders eased. "It's good. Better than some places I've laid my head. You've moved around a lot." Then she asked, keeping her tone light. "Montana, Wyoming, Colorado," he said, his eyes drifting to the horizon. "Never stayed anywhere too long." "Why not?" He hesitated, jaw tightening. "Just how it's been." Ellie sensed the wall rising and let it be. "Well, I'm glad you're here," she said, surprised by how much she meant it. "We need someone like you." Nate's gaze softened. "Glad to be here." Their eyes locked, a moment stretching between them. Warm and electric. Ellie broke it first, clearing her throat. "I've got to check the herd. Diego's probably waiting." "I'll finish with Storm Chaser and join you," Nate said, already turning back to the horse. As she walked away, Ellie stole a glance over her shoulder. Nate was watching her, a thoughtful expression on his face. She quickly looked ahead, her pulse quickening. The day rolled on under a blazing sun, the ranch humming with its familiar rhythm. But something felt different, a new energy weaving through the dust and sweat. Ellie found herself drawn to Nate, catching glimpses of him as he worked. His movements were fluid, commanding a quiet respect that even Diego, the gruffest of her hands, acknowledged with a nickname: Caballo, horseman. By noon, the heat was relentless, and Ellie called a break. The crew sprawled under a massive oak, canteens clinking as they cooled off. Ellie perched on a log, her hat tipped back, when Nate approached, a small wooden figure in his hand. "What's that?" she asked. Curiosity piqued. He held it out, a carved horse, tiny but intricate, its mane flowing like it was caught in a gust. "Something I whittle when I've got time." Ellie took it, marveling at the craftsmanship. "You made this?" Nate shrugged, a touch of color in his cheeks. "Keeps me busy." "It's beautiful," she said, running her thumb over the smooth wood. "You've got a real talent." He looked away, a shadow flickering across his face. "Did more of it once, when I had a place of my own." Her ears perked up. "You had a ranch." "Something like that," he said, voice tight. "Gone now." The pain in his tone stopped her from pressing further. She handed the carving back. "Maybe you'll find a new place someday." Nate's eyes searched hers. Maybe. The moment hung, heavy with possibility, until Diego's voice boomed across the clearing. "Break's over. Folks back to it." Ellie stood, brushing off her jeans. "Duty calls." Nate rose too, his hand grazing hers as he did a fleeting touch that sent a spark through her. She pulled away, cheeks warm, and threw herself back into the work. The afternoon wove them together, tasks aligning their paths. They spoke little, but the silence felt easy, a thread of understanding tying them closer. As the sun dipped low, painting the ranch in gold, Ellie felt a shift, a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing sliding into place. That evening, she sat on her porch, the stars winking awake. Footsteps crunched on the gravel, and she looked up to see Nate, hat in hand. "Evening," he said, pausing at the steps. "Evening," she replied, nodding to the chair beside her. "Join me." He climbed the steps and settled in, the wood creaking softly. They sat in silence, the night alive with crickets and the occasional coyote call. Finally, Ellie broke it. "I've run this ranch for years, but some days it feels like I'm barely holding on. My father built it from scratch, and I'm scared of losing it." Nate turned to her, his gaze steady. "You're doing more than holding on, Ellie. This place thrives because of you." She smiled, bittersweet. "Doesn't always feel that way. After my marriage fell apart, Robert couldn't take this life. I started wondering if I'm meant to do it alone." "He was a fool to leave," Nate said, his voice firm. Her heart stuttered. "Maybe, but it's hard not to doubt." Nate leaned closer, earnest. "You're not alone. You've got a crew that'd ride through fire for you, and you've got me. If that means anything." "It means a lot," she whispered, caught in his gaze. Time slowed, the world shrinking to just them. A coyote's howl sliced through, and Ellie laughed, breaking the tension. "I should rest. Big day tomorrow." Nate stood, lingering. "Good night, Ellie." "Good night, Nate." As he walked away, a warmth bloomed in her chest, a fragile hope taking root. But as she turned to go inside, a shadow caught her eye. Someone near the barn, watching. Her stomach dropped, too dark to see who. But the chill in her bones told her trouble was stirring. The shadow by the barn lingered in Ellie's mind as she lay in bed, the Montana night pressing against her window. Sleep evaded her, the chill of that unseen watcher knotting her stomach. Blue Horizon Ranch had faced threats before coyotes, rustlers, the occasional drunk drifter, but this felt different, sharper, personal. By dawn, she was up, her grey eyes scanning the horizon as she pulled on her jacket, the weight of Nate's words from the night before. "You're not alone," warming her despite the unease. She stepped onto the porch, the air sharp with the scent of pine and dew. The ranch was stirring, the crew already moving like ants across the vast landscape. Ellie's gaze flicked to the barn, half expecting to see that shadow again, but only the soft glow of sunrise met her. She shook off the feeling, chalking it up to exhaustion, and headed toward the corral where Nate was already working with Storm Chaser. The mare's calm demeanor under his hands was a small miracle, a reminder of why she'd hired him despite the mystery he carried. "Morning," Ellie said, her voice steadier than she felt. Nate glanced up, his brown eyes catching the light. "Morning. You look like you didn't sleep." She managed a half smile. "Too much on my mind." "You same," he admitted, his tone clipped. He turned back to Storm Chaser, but his shoulders were tense, like he sensed the same unease she did. Before she could press, Diego Alvarez strode up, his weathered face grim. "Ellie, we've got trouble. Found tracks near the north fence, boot prints, not ours. Someone's been poking around." Her stomach twisted, the shadow from last night flashing in her mind. "Rustlers," Diego shook his head. "Too careful. Rustlers don't skulk like that. Feels deliberate." Nate's hand stilled on the mare. "You got enemies." Ellie, she hesitated, her mind racing. Blue Horizon was a prize 50,000 acres of prime Montana land. Plenty wanted a piece of it, none more than Bartholomew Bart Lowell. a neighboring rancher with a smile like a snake and ambition to match. Maybe, she said, her voice low. Bart Lowell's been sniffing around for years, trying to buy me out. Nate's jaw tightened. He the type to play dirty. Diego snorted. Dirty as a pig in a dust storm. Ellie's pulse quickened. Show me the tracks. They rode out to the north fence, the morning sun climbing higher, casting long shadows across the rolling hills. The tracks were clear, deep, deliberate imprints in the soft earth, circling the fence line like a predator sizing up prey. Ellie crouched, her fingers brushing the dirt. These are fresh. Last night. Maybe. Nate dismounted, his eyes scanning the horizon. Whoever it was. They're watching you. Testing your defenses. The words sent a shiver down her spine, but she stood, brushing off her hands. Let's double the night watch. Diego, tell Clara and Hank to keep their eyes open. Diego nodded, spurring his horse back toward the main house. Ellie turned to Nate, her voice firm. You're sticking close today. I need someone I can trust. His gaze held hers, steady and unyielding. You've got me. The day unfolded in a tense rhythm, the crew on edge as they worked. Ellie threw herself into tasks, checking irrigation lines, tallying cattle, but the air felt charged, like a storm was brewing. By late afternoon, the sky darkened, heavy clouds rolling in from the west. The first rumble of thunder echoed as Ellie and Nate rode out to check the herd in the western pasture, the wind whipping their hats. As they crested a hill, the world exploded into chaos. A deafening crack split the air, not thunder, but the snap of wood. Below, the fence line was shattered, splintered posts scattered like broken bones, hundreds of cattle stampeded, their hooves churning the earth into a muddy frenzy, driven by the storm's fury and something or someone else. Damn it, Ellie shouted, her heart pounding. We've got to round them up before they hit the river. Nate was already moving, his horse surging forward. Follow me. They plunged into the chaos, rain lashing their faces, mud sucking at their horses' hooves. Ellie's world narrowed to the bellowing cattle, the sting of rain, and Nate's figure cutting through the storm like a blade. He rode with a grace that stole her breath, his shouts guiding the crew as they appeared from the haze. Diego, Clara, Hank, all fighting the deluge to save the herd. Lightning cracked, illuminating Nate as he leaned low, lasso spinning. He roped a stray steer, pulling it back with a strength that seemed to defy the storm. Ellie rode alongside, herding a cluster of panicked cattle toward a makeshift corral. Her muscles burned, her lungs ached, but she pushed on, Nate's presence a steady anchor in the madness. Hours bled into eternity, the rain relentless, the cattle wild. But slowly, they gained ground, corralling the herd into a tight knot. As the storm began to ease, Ellie's eyes caught something, a flicker of movement near the broken fence. A figure, cloaked in a slicker, darted into the trees. Her blood ran cold. Nate, she called, pointing. There he followed her gaze, his face hardening. Without a word, he spurred his horse, tearing after the figure. Ellie followed, her heart hammering. The trees closed around them, branches clawing at her face as they rode. Ahead, Nate leaped from his saddle, tackling the stranger to the ground. A scuffle broke out, fists flying, mud splattering. Ellie dismounted, drawing her revolver, a precaution she rarely used. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the rain. Nate pinned the man down, revealing a wiry figure with a scarred face. "Who sent you?" Nate growled, his grip unyielding. The man spat, his eyes darting. "You'll get nothing from me." Ellie stepped closer, her gun steady. "Talk, or I'll drag you to the sheriff myself." The man's defiance faltered, But before he could speak, a twig snapped behind them. Ellie spun, her pulse spiking, only to see Diego emerging from the trees, his rifle raised. "Found another set of tracks," he said, breathless. "Leads toward Lowell's land." Ellie's stomach dropped. Bart Lowell. She'd suspected he was trouble, but this was bold, too bold. "Tie him up," she told Nate. "We're taking him to the barn." As they bound the man's hands, Ellie's mind raced. The storm, the broken fence, the stampede, it wasn't chance. It was sabotage. And Nate, standing beside her, his shirt soaked and his eyes blazing, was no longer just a hired hand. He was part of this fight, part of her world. They rode back to the ranch, the prisoner slumped between them, the sky clearing to reveal a blood-red sunset. Ellie's heart pounded with a mix of fear and resolve. Blue Horizon was under siege, and Nate's past, whatever he was hiding, was tied to it somehow. She glanced at him, his jaw set, his hands steady on the reins. Whoever he was, whatever he'd lost, he was here now. And so was she. The red sunset bled into twilight as Ellie, Nate, and Diego hauled their captive back to Blue Horizon Ranch, the prisoner's wrists bound tight with rope. The man's sullen silence did little to ease the storm brewing in Ellie's chest. Bart Lowell's shadow loomed larger than ever, his name a bitter taste on her tongue. The sabotaged fence, the stampeding cattle, the tracks leading toward his land, it all pointed to him. But proof was another matter, and Ellie knew better than to charge in blind. As they reached the barn, the ranch glowed under the first stars, a fragile haven in a world that felt increasingly hostile. Nate dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a thud, and hauled the prisoner toward the barn's side door. "We'll keep him here till morning," he said, his voice low but firm. "Then we take him to the sheriff." Ellie nodded, her mind racing. "Diego, get Clara and Hank. I want everyone on alert tonight." Diego tipped his hat and strode off, his silhouette blending into the dusk. Ellie turned to Nate, who was securing the prisoner to a post inside the barn. The man, scar-faced and wiry, glared up at them, his lips curled in defiance. "You're wasting your time," he spat. "Lowell's got more men than you can handle." Ellie's blood ran hot, but she kept her voice steady. "We'll see about that." Nate shot her a glance, his brown eyes unreadable but intense. "He's baiting you. Don't let him." She exhaled, forcing her shoulders to relax. "I know. But if Lowell's behind this, I need to know how deep it goes." Nate straightened, dust in his hands on his jeans. "We'll get answers. Just be careful." The concern in his voice caught her off guard, stirring something warm and unsettling in her chest. She pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. "Let's get some coffee and figure out our next move." They left the prisoner under Hank's watchful eye and headed to the main house, the night air sharp against their skin. Inside, the kitchen smelled of fresh-baked cornbread, courtesy of Clara, who was already there, her vet kit open on the table as she cleaned her tools. "Heard we caught a snake," she said, her tone dry as she glanced up. "More like a weasel," Ellie muttered, pouring coffee into tin mugs. She handed one to Nate, her fingers brushing his, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through her. She pulled back, heat creeping up her neck, and busied herself with the coffee pot, hoping he hadn't noticed. Nate, mercifully, said nothing, though a faint smirk played on his lips as he took a sip. "Good brew," he said, his voice teasing. Ellie shot him a look, half annoyed, half amused. "Don't get used to it. I don't make it for just anyone." Clara snorted, not looking up. "Careful, Nate. She's got a mean streak when you cross her." Nate's smirk widened. "Noted." The banter lightened the mood, but the weight of the situation lingered. Ellie sat at the table, her hands wrapped around her mug. Lowell's been after this land for years, she said, her voice low. But this breaking fences, spooking cattle, it's bold, even for him. Nate leaned against the counter, his expression darkening. Men like that don't stop unless you make them. Something in his tone, hard, edged with pain, made Ellie pause. She wanted to ask, to dig into the shadows he carried, but Clara's sharp glance stopped her. "What's our play?" Boss the vet asked, snapping her kit shut. Ellie took a breath. "We watch the borders, double the patrols. Tomorrow, I'll ride to town and talk to Sheriff Dawson, no relation to Hank." She added with a wry smile, "We need to know if anyone else has had trouble with Lowell." Nate nodded, but his eyes flicked to the window, scanning the dark. "I'll take first watch tonight." Ellie opened her mouth to argue she didn't need protecting, but the intensity in his gaze stopped her. "Fine," she said, "but don't play hero. We do this together." He tipped his head, a silent agreement, and headed for the door. As he stepped out, Clara leaned over, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "That man's got it bad for you." Ellie choked on her coffee, spluttering. "Clara." What? Clara grinned. "Unrepentant. I've got eyes, and you're not exactly subtle, blushing like a schoolgirl." "I am not blushing," Ellie hissed, her cheeks betraying her. She stood, grabbing her hat. "I'm checking the horses." Clara's laughter followed her out into the night, where the air was cool and the stars burned bright. Ellie headed to the corral, her boots crunching on gravel, her mind a tangle of Lowell's threats, the prisoner's words, and damn it, Nate's smirk. She found Storm Chaser pacing, her black coat gleaming under the moonlight. Ellie reached out, but the mare shied away, snorting. "Figures," Ellie muttered. "Even you're giving me trouble tonight." A soft chuckle came from behind her. She spun to find Nate leaning against the fence, his hat tilted back. Talking to horses now. She crossed her arms, fighting a smile. "They listen better than most people." He stepped closer, his presence warm in the cool night. "Maybe you just haven't found the right people." Her heart skipped, and she cursed herself for it. "Your trouble, Nate Caldwell," she said, her voice lighter than she meant. "Only the good kind," he replied, his eyes dancing. The moment stretched, charged and awkward, until a sharp crack echoed from the north pasture, a gunshot. Unmistakable. Ellie's hand flew to her revolver, her pulse spiking. Nate was already moving, his own gun drawn, his body shielding hers instinctively. "Stay low," he whispered, his voice all business now. They crept toward the sound, the ranch eerily silent except for the distant whinny of a horse. Ellie's heart pounded, her senses sharp. As they neared the pasture, they saw it a section of irrigation pipe, shattered, water gushing into the dirt, turning it to mud. Another act of sabotage. "Lowell," Ellie growled, her fists clenching. Nate's eyes scanned the darkness. "He's playing a long game, trying to bleed you dry." Before she could respond, a figure stumbled from the shadows. Hank, his limp pronounced, his face pale. "Ellie, it's bad," he panted. Found a note pinned to the pipe. Says, "Sell or lose everything." Ellie's blood ran cold. She took the crumpled paper from Hank, her hands shaking as she read the scrawled words. It was Lowell's handwriting. She'd seen it on contracts he'd tried to shove under her nose. The threat was clear, and it lit a fire in her gut. Nate's hand brushed her shoulder, steadying her. "We'll stop him," he said, his voice low and fierce. "But we need to be smart." She met his gaze, the fire in her mirrored in his eyes. Smart and fast. As they turned back to the house, Ellie's mind raced. Lowell was escalating, and the prisoner in the barn was only the beginning. But with Nate beside her, his quiet strength a counterpoint to her own, she felt a spark of hope. They were in this together, and come hell or high water, Blue Horizon would stand. The crumpled note in Ellie's hand felt like a lit fuse, its words sell or lose everything burning into her mind as she and Nate walked back to the main house under a starlit Montana sky. The sabotaged irrigation pipe was only the latest blow in Bart Lowell's campaign to break her, and the weight of it pressed against her chest. Yet, Nate's presence beside her, his steady stride and the warmth of his hand brushing her shoulder, grounded her in a way she hadn't felt in years. Blue Horizon Ranch was her battleground, and she wasn't fighting alone. Inside the house, the kitchen glowed softly, the scent of coffee lingering from earlier. Ellie tossed the note onto the table, her jaw tight. Lowell's not just threatening, now he's acting. That pipe could have ruined half our grazing land. Nate leaned against the counter, his brown eyes intense. He's trying to scare you into selling. But you're tougher than that. She met his gaze, a flicker of warmth cutting through her anger. Maybe, but I'm tired. Nate. Tired of fighting for every inch of this place. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the earth and leather on him. You don't have to carry it all alone, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. The air between them thickened, charged with something more than the day's chaos. Ellie's pulse quickened, her breath catching as his hand hovered near hers, not quite touching. She should have stepped back, should have focused on the threat, but her body betrayed her, leaning toward him like a flower to the sun. We should plan our next move, she said, her voice unsteady. Nate's lips curved, a knowing glint in his eyes. We will. But you need a break, Ellie, just for a moment. Before she could argue, he took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and sure, and led her outside to the porch. The night was quiet now, the stars a glittering canopy above the ranch. He didn't let go, his thumb brushing her knuckles in a way that sent a shiver down her spine. They sat on the steps, the wood cool beneath them, and for a moment the world shrank to just the two of them. You ever think about running away from all this? Nate asked, his voice soft, his gaze on the horizon. Ellie laughed, a low, bittersweet sound. Every damn day. But this ranch, it's in my blood. My father, his father, all the way back to James Whitaker. I can't walk away. Nate turned to her, his face half lit by moonlight. I get that. I had something like that once. A place I thought I'd never leave. Her heart tugged at the pain in his voice. What happened? He hesitated, then reached into his pocket, pulling out a small wooden horse carving, its lines worn smooth. Lost it. Fire took everything, my home, my work, my purpose. Ellie's fingers brushed his as she took the carving, her touch lingering. You're finding a new purpose here, aren't you? His eyes locked onto hers, deep and searching. Maybe I am. The moment stretched, electric and heavy. Ellie's breath hitched as Nate leaned closer, his hand sliding to her cheek, his touch gentle but firm. Her heart raced, a part of her screaming to pull back, to protect the walls she'd built after Robert's betrayal. But another part, wilder, hungrier, urged her forward. When his lips met hers, soft but deliberate, she melted into him, her hands finding his shoulders, gripping the worn fabric of his shirt. The kiss deepened, a slow burn that ignited something long dormant in Ellie. His hands slid to her waist, pulling her closer, and she felt the warmth of his body against hers, the steady rhythm of his breath. It was tender but charged, a promise of something more, yet restrained by the unspoken boundaries of the moment. Her fingers tangled in his hair, and for a heartbeat, the ranch, Lowell, the threats, they all vanished. A horse's whinny from the corral broke the spell. Ellie pulled back, her cheeks flushed, her breath uneven. Nate's eyes were dark, a mix of desire and something softer, more vulnerable. "I'm sorry," he murmured, though his hand lingered on her waist. "Didn't mean to, don't," she interrupted, her voice husky. "Don't apologize." He smiled, a crooked, boyish grin that made her heart flip. "All right, but we're going to have to talk about this." She laughed, the sound lighter than she'd felt in days. "Maybe. But not tonight." They stood, the night wrapping around them like a blanket. Ellie's body hummed, the memory of his touch lingering like a warm ember. But as they turned to go inside, a sharp clatter echoed from the barn metal on wood. Followed by a muffled curse. Ellie froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the knife at her belt. Nate was already moving, his gun drawn. "Stay behind me," he whispered. They crept toward the barn, the moonlight casting long shadows. Inside, the prisoner was struggling against his ropes, a rusted nail in his hand, half sawed through the bindings. He froze as Nate's shadow fell over him, his scarred face twisting in defiance. "Going somewhere," Nate growled, his gun steady. Ellie stepped forward, her voice cold. "Talk. Now." "What's Lowell planning?" The man sneered, but fear flickered in his eyes. "You're done, Whitaker. Lowell's got plans bigger than you can handle." That pipe was just the start. Nate tightened his grip, his voice low and dangerous. "What plans?" The man clamped his mouth shut, but Ellie caught the glint of panic in his eyes. She leaned in, her voice sharp. "You tell us, or you'll wish you'd never set foot on my land." Before he could respond, a loud crack split the air, a rifle shot, close. Ellie and Nate ducked, the prisoner lunging against his ropes. Outside, Diego's voice rang out. "Ellie, we've got riders on the ridge." Ellie's heart pounded as she and Nate raced outside, the night alive with danger. In the distance, 3 silhouettes moved against the starlit ridge, their horses' hooves thudding softly. Lowell's men, no doubt. Scouting or worse. Ellie's blood boiled, but Nate's hand on her arm steadied her. "We can't fight them blind," he said. "We need to know what we're up against." She nodded, her mind racing. "Get the crew, we'll set a trap." As Nate ran to rally Diego, Clara, and Hank, Ellie's gaze lingered on the ridge, her resolve hardening. Lowell was coming for her ranch, her home, her legacy, but with Nate by her side, his kiss still warm on her lips, she felt a fire she hadn't known in years. This was her land, her fight, and she'd be damned if she let anyone take it. The night air crackled with tension as Ellie and Nate crouched behind a stack of hay bales, the silhouettes of Lowell's riders still visible on the ridge. The memory of Nate's kiss lingered on Ellie's lips, a spark of warmth in the cold dread that gripped her. Blue Horizon Ranch was under siege, and the threat of Bartholomew Lowell's men loomed like a storm about to break. Diego, Clara, and Hank were spreading out, rifles ready, their shadows blending into the dark as they prepared to spring a trap. Ellie's heart pounded, but Nate's steady presence beside her anchored her resolve. "We've got one chance to catch them off guard," Nate whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "If they're scouting, they'll report back to Lowell. We need to know what he's planning." Ellie nodded, her grip tightening on her revolver. "Let's move." They crept toward the ridge, keeping low, the grass whispering under their boots. The riders, 3 men. Hats pulled low, were dismounting, their voices a low murmur carried by the wind. Ellie strained to hear, catching fragments. "Fence tomorrow. Water supply." "She'll break." Her blood boiled. Lowell wasn't just after her land, he was targeting her livelihood, piece by piece. Nate signaled to Diego, who was circling around with Clara. The plan was simple: flank the riders, cut off their escape, and take them alive for answers. But as Ellie shifted to get a better view, a glint fell from Nate's jacket, a photograph fluttering to the ground. She grabbed it instinctively, her eyes darting to the faded image, a sprawling ranch. A sign reading Caldwell Crest, and Nate, younger, smiling beside a man with sharp eyes and a sly grin. Her stomach dropped. She knew that face. Nate, she hissed, holding up the photo. "Who's this?" His face froze, his eyes locking onto the image. For a moment, he didn't speak, the silence heavy with something darker than the night. "Not now," he whispered, his voice tight. Ellie's heart stuttered. "Nate, that's Victor Kane. I've seen him with Lowell." The words hit like a thunderclap. Nate's jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with a pain so raw it stole her breath. Before she could press, a shout rang out Diego, signaling the trap. The riders spun, drawing their guns, and chaos erupted. Shots cracked through the night, horses rearing as Nate and Ellie dove for cover behind a boulder. Diego and Clara fired from the left, pinning the riders down, while Hank circled from the right, his limp barely slowing him. Ellie's mind raced, the photograph burning a hole in her pocket. Victor Kane Lowell's associate. A man tied to Nate's past. The pieces didn't fit, but the fight demanded her focus. She leaned out, firing a warning shot that sent one rider scrambling. Nate moved like a shadow, tackling another to the ground, his fists a blur. The third rider bolted toward his horse, but Clara's lasso snaked out, yanking him back. In minutes, it was over. The riders were bound, their guns confiscated, their faces a mix of fear and defiance. Ellie stood, her chest heaving, as Diego dragged them toward the barn. "Take them to the prisoner," she ordered. "We'll get answers tonight." Nate stayed silent, his gaze fixed on the ground where the photo had fallen. Ellie pulled it out, holding it up. "You need to talk. Now." He exhaled, his shoulders slumping. "Ellie, I—" A sharp whistle cut him off. Hank, waving frantically from the barn. "Ellie, the prisoner's gone." Her blood ran cold. She and Nate sprinted to the barn, finding the ropes cut clean, the nail the prisoner had used glinting on the floor. A scrap of cloth was caught on a nail, a piece of a jacket, embroidered with a small L. Lowell's men had been here, freeing their own under their noses. Ellie's anger flared, but it was Nate's silence that unnerved her. She rounded on him, the photo trembling in her hand. "Victor Kane. You knew him. And now he's tied to Lowell." "What aren't you telling me?" Nate's eyes met hers, haunted and raw. "Kane was my partner," he said, his voice breaking. "3 years ago, he burned my ranch Caldwell Crest to the ground. 18 horses died because of him. I thought he was long gone. But if he's with Lowell..." The twist hit Ellie like a punch. Nate's past wasn't just a shadow, it was tied to the very man threatening her ranch. Victor Kane, the arsonist who'd destroyed Nate's life, was working with Lowell, orchestrating the attacks on Blue Horizon. The betrayal in Nate's voice, the guilt etched into his face, told her this wasn't just business, it was personal. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "I didn't know he was here," Nate said, his hands clenching. "I swear, Ellie, I've been running from that for years. I thought I'd left it behind." Her heart twisted, torn between trust and doubt. "And now it's followed you. To my home." Nate stepped closer, his voice urgent. "I'll fix this. Whatever Kane's planning with Lowell, I'll stop it. I owe you that." She wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to the warmth of his kiss from hours ago, but the photo in her hand felt like a wedge between them. Before she could respond, Clara burst in, her face pale. "Ellie, the water tank, it's leaking. Someone tampered with it. We're losing what's left of the irrigation supply." Ellie's vision blurred with rage. Lowell and Kane were hitting her where it hurt most, and Nate's past was tangled in the mess. She shoved the photo into her pocket, her voice steel. "We'll deal with the tank, and then we're going after them." Nate nodded, his face set with determination. "I'm with you." As they rushed to the water tank, the night seemed to close in. The stars dimmer now. Ellie's mind spun with the revelation Victor Kane, a ghost from Nate's past, was no ghost at all. He was here, striking at her ranch, and Nate's arrival wasn't chance, it was fate, pulling them into a fight neither could escape. The stakes were higher now, the danger closer, and as Ellie glanced at Nate, his jaw tight and his eyes burning, she knew this battle would test them both in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The sabotaged water tank loomed in the moonlight, its slow leak pooling into the Montana dirt like blood from a wound. Ellie's heart raced as she and Nate reached the scene, the revelation of Victor Kane's involvement still burning in her mind. His connection to Nate, once a partner, now a traitor tied to Bart Lowell, cast a shadow over everything, including the fragile trust she'd built with the man beside her. Blue Horizon Ranch was fighting for survival, and the stakes had never been higher. Yet, as she glanced at Nate, his face etched with guilt and resolve, she felt a pull she couldn't ignore, even amidst the chaos. Clara was already at the tank, her sleeves rolled up, cursing under her breath as she wrestled with a wrench. "This isn't just a leak," she called, her voice sharp. "Someone drilled holes small, precise, meant to drain us slow." Ellie's fists clenched, her anger flaring. "Lowell and Kane," she spat. "They're trying to choke us out." Nate crouched beside the tank, inspecting the damage. "We can patch it for now, but we need to guard it round the clock. They'll hit again." Diego jogged up, his rifle slung over his shoulder. "Found more tracks, same boots as the ridge. They're not even hiding anymore." Ellie's mind raced, piecing together a plan. "We'll set a guard rotation 2 at a time, all night." "Clara, can you fix the tank?" Clara wiped sweat from her brow, her grin wry. "If I can stitch a calf's leg, I can patch a tank. But I'll need help." "I've got you," Nate said, rolling up his sleeves. He glanced at Ellie, a flicker of something softer in his eyes. "You good?" She nodded, though her insides churned. "Let's move." The crew worked fast, the night alive with the clank of tools and the murmur of voices. Ellie patrolled the perimeter, her revolver heavy at her hip, her thoughts a tangle of Lowell's threats, Kane's betrayal, and Nate's past. The photograph she'd found Nate and Kane, smiling like brothers, sat heavy in her pocket. She wanted to trust him, wanted to believe his pain was real, but doubt gnawed at her. As dawn broke, painting the sky pink, the tank was patched, and the crew gathered in the barn to plan. Ellie stood at the center, her voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing her down. "We've got proof Lowell's men are hitting us tracks. The note, the prisoner's words. But Kane." She glanced at Nate, who stood against the wall, his face unreadable. "Kane's the wild card. We need to know his next move." Hank, nursing a cup of coffee, cleared his throat. "Sheriff Dawson's a good man, but he'll need more than tracks to move on Lowell. We need to catch them red-handed." Diego nodded. "Set a trap. Lure them to the east pasture, it's isolated. Easy to watch." Ellie considered it, her eyes flicking to Nate. "What do you think?" He straightened, his voice low. "It's risky, but it could work. Let them think we're vulnerable. I'll lead the watch." The room went quiet, all eyes on him. Ellie felt the weight of their scrutiny, the unspoken question of his past hanging in the air. She opened her mouth to speak, but Clara, ever the troublemaker, broke the tension with a grin. "Careful, Nate. You're volunteering to be bait. Hope you're as good with a gun as you are with horses. Nate's lips twitched, a spark of humor cutting through his tension. I manage. The crew chuckled, but Ellie's smile faded as she caught Nate's eye. The moment lingered, awkward and charged, until Diego clapped his hands. All right, let's set it up. East pasture, tonight. As the crew dispersed, Ellie pulled Nate aside, her voice low. We need to talk about Kane. No more secrets. He nodded, his jaw tight. Not here. Somewhere private. They slipped out to the creek behind the ranch, where willows draped over the water, their branches swaying in the morning breeze. The spot was quiet, hidden, and Ellie felt her pulse quicken, not just from the conversation ahead, but from the memory of Nate's kiss, the way his hands had felt on her waist. She pushed it down, focusing on the task. Tell me everything, she said, crossing her arms. Nate leaned against a tree, his eyes distant. Kane was my best friend. We built Caldwell Crest together, trained horses, ran clinics. He handled the books. I handled the animals. 3 years ago, I found out he was stealing, siphoning money for years. I confronted him, gave him a chance to come clean. Instead, he burned it all down. 18 horses. His voice broke, his hands clenching. I couldn't save them. Ellie's heart ached, the pain in his voice mirroring her own losses. She stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm. It wasn't your fault. He looked at her, his eyes raw. I trusted him, and now he's here, hurting you. I brought this to your door. You didn't know, she said, her voice fierce. But you're here now, fighting for me, for us. The words slipped out us, and Ellie froze, her cheeks flushing. Nate's eyes widened, a slow smile spreading. Us. Huh. She groaned, covering her face. Don't start. He laughed, a low, warm sound that eased the tension. Too late. The moment hung, light and teasing, until a rustle in the bushes snapped them back to reality. Ellie's hand flew to her knife, but it was only a rabbit, darting across the bank. They both exhaled, then laughed, the sound awkward but real. We're jumpy, Ellie said, shaking her head. With good reason, Nate replied, his tone sobering. Tonight's trap Kane might show. If he does, I'll face him. Ellie's stomach twisted, not alone. He took her hand, his grip firm. Not alone. As they walked back to the ranch, the sun climbing higher, Ellie felt the weight of the coming night. Lowell and Kane were closing in, their plan unraveling her home piece by piece. But Nate's hand in hers, warm and steady, sparked a fire in her chest. The trap was set, and whatever came, Kane's betrayal, Lowell's greed, or the fragile us blooming between them, she was ready to fight. The creek babbled behind them, a quiet promise that the storm, when it broke, would find Blue Horizon standing tall. The sun dipped low over Blue Horizon Ranch, casting a golden glow across the Montana plains as Ellie and Nate prepared for the trap in the east pasture. The weight of Victor Kane's betrayal and Bart Lowell's relentless campaign hung heavy, but Nate's hand in hers, warm and steady, anchored Ellie in a way she hadn't felt since her father's time. The creek's gentle babble faded behind them as they returned to the ranch. Their resolve hardened. Tonight, they'd face Lowell's men and possibly Kane himself in a stand that would decide the future of her home. The crew gathered at dusk, their faces set with determination. Diego checked his rifle, Clara sharpened her lasso skills, and Hank, despite his limp, insisted on joining the watch. Ellie briefed them, her voice steady. We let them think we're vulnerable. When they move, we close the net. No one gets away. Nate nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. I'll take the high ground. If Kane's there, I'll spot him. Ellie caught the pain in his voice, the ghost of his past rising again. She squeezed his hand, a silent promise, and they dispersed to their positions, the night settling over the ranch like a held breath. Hours passed, the stars bright and unyielding. Ellie crouched behind a boulder, her heart pounding as she watched the pasture. Then movement, 4 riders, their horses' hooves muffled by the soft earth. Her pulse spiked. This was it. She signaled to Diego, who whistled low, and the crew tightened their circle. The riders crept closer, unaware of the trap. One carried a torch, its flame flickering as he neared the fence line. Ellie's blood boiled. Another sabotage, another blow to her legacy. She gave the signal, and chaos erupted. Diego and Clara charged from the left, ropes flying, while Hank fired a warning shot from the right. Nate descended from the ridge, his gun drawn, his figure cutting through the dark like a blade. The riders scrambled, but the crew was faster. Clara's lasso snagged one, pulling him from his horse, while Diego tackled another. Ellie sprinted forward, her revolver raised, only to freeze as a 5th figure emerged from the shadows. Victor Kane, his sharp eyes glinting, a smirk on his face. "Well, well," he drawled. "Nate Caldwell. Never thought I'd see you again." Nate's face hardened, his gun steady. "You shouldn't have come." "Victor." Ellie's heart raced, the air thick with their shared history. Kane laughed, cold and cutting. "You think you can stop Lowell? This ranch is done, Whitaker. And Nate. He's too broken to save you." Nate lunged, but Ellie grabbed his arm, her voice fierce. "He's baiting you." "Don't." Kane's smirk faltered as the crew closed in, binding his men. He raised his hands, mocking surrender. "Fine, take me to the sheriff. But you're too late. Lowell's already won." Ellie's blood ran cold, but she held firm. "We'll see about that." They hauled the prisoners to the barn, the night alive with the crew's triumph. But Ellie's mind churned Kane's words, Lowell's plan, the stakes higher than ever. At dawn, they rode to town, delivering Kane and his men to Sheriff Dawson. The sheriff's eyes widened at the sight of Kane. "He's wanted in Billings for arson," he said, glancing at Nate. "You're the Caldwell from Caldwell Crest, aren't you?" Nate nodded, his jaw tight. "I'll testify. Whatever it takes." Ellie stood beside him, her hand brushing his. "We'll do it together." The trial in Billings was swift and brutal. Nate took the stand, his voice steady as he recounted Kane's betrayal, the theft, the fire, the loss of 18 horses. Ellie watched, her heart aching for the pain he carried, but swelling with pride as he faced his past. Kane's lies unraveled under cross-examination, his alibi crumbling when investigators presented forged documents. The judge's gavel fell, sentencing Kane to 18 years, a weight lifting from Nate's shoulders as he stepped down. Back at Blue Horizon, Ellie turned her focus to Lowell. With Kane's confession implicating him, she and Nate gathered evidence tracks, notes, the prisoner's testimony, and confronted Lowell at his ranch. The man's smug facade cracked as Sheriff Dawson arrived, armed with a warrant. Lowell's sabotage was exposed, his hired men turning on him to save themselves. He was arrested, his empire crumbling, and Blue Horizon stood tall. Weeks later, the ranch buzzed with new life. Nate trained Storm Chaser for a regional competition in Billings, his bond with the mare a testament to his healing. Ellie watched him work, her heart full. The night before the event, by the creek under a starlit sky, Nate pulled her close, his voice soft. "Ellie, I've been running a long time, but here, with you, I've found home." Her breath caught as he knelt, offering a simple gold ring etched with a horseshoe. "His grandmother's," he said. "Marry me," he whispered. Tears welled in Ellie's eyes. "Yes," she said, pulling him up to kiss him. the world fading to just them. The competition was a triumph. Nate and Stormchaser moved as one, their performance earning a standing ovation and first place, Blue Horizon's name shining once more. Ellie cheered from the stands, her heart soaring. Their wedding took place on the ranch's golden fields, under Montana's endless sky. Stormchaser, adorned with wildflowers, stood by the fence, a symbol of their shared journey. Diego, beaming like a proud father, walked Ellie down the aisle, the crew and community cheering. They exchanged vows, promising to build a future together. Rooted in love and resilience, Blue Horizon became Whitaker Caldwell Ranch. A new sign hung with pride. Whitaker Caldwell Ranch, where trust is built and love endures. Nate's dream took shape, a training center for horses and youth, a beacon of hope for the broken. Ellie stood beside him, her hand in his, as they welcomed local children to learn patience and care through the animals. Under the Montana stars, Ellie and Nate wrote a new chapter, their love a testament to healing and strength. The ranch thrived, its legacy secure, proof that from loss and betrayal, something beautiful could rise stronger, brighter, forever.